Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel, and today I wanted to make a video on one of my favorite artists of all time, which is Kanye West. And yeah, Kanye West has been in a lot of controversy pretty much since his whole career has started, but I've been a person that has always been able to separate the music from the actual person behind the microphone. Today I wanted to make a tier list on albums that I've actually all listened to pretty much. I've listened to all of Kanye's discography, so today I wanted to make a video on the entire discography of Kanye West. And I will give you guys my opinion on every single album right here on a tier list. You guys know how the deal works. Let's get straight to it. So the first album we have is the College Dropout. Now the College Dropout, in my opinion, is an S-tier Kanye album. From the very first track to the very last track, this album was really good because Kanye was hungry on this album. And the amount of bangers on this album, from Jesus Walks, Through the Wire, We Don't Care. There's so many great songs on this album that it has to be an S tier just because of how it really set the bar for the rest of his career. I don't think anyone's going to debate me that this is one of his best albums, and it's kind of tough that he had to follow up this album for the rest of his career pretty much. My favorite song on the College Dropout is the opening track, We Don't Care. Now the next album we have is Late Registration, which is the second in the trilogy of the Graduation albums. And in my opinion, it is also an S-tier album, just not as good as the College Dropout. When it comes to making a sequel, this is honestly amazing because it was able to take a lot of things that the College Dropout did well and was able to take all the good stuff out of that album and add a bunch of new stuff on top of that with a bunch of jazz and a bunch of new features and everything else. There's all these hit songs on this album. It's really, really good. However, there are a couple songs on this album that kind of lower the experience for me a little, which is why I would put it under the College Dropout. But it is still an easy S tier, in my opinion, in his discography. My favorite song on Late Registration is We Major because of the NBA 2K13 soundtrack. That song actually got me into hip-hop at a very, very young age. If you guys know NBA 2K13, you guys remember the song. I even had to get it on vinyl because I loved it that much. Up next we have Graduation, which is the final in the trilogy for the Graduation series. And this album, Graduation, is the hypebeast album now. The amount of frat boys I see listening to this album, as well as the amount of people on TikTok that love this album, it is easily his most popular album right now because a lot of the songs are becoming really trendy. But that's not to say that this album is also really, really good. I would say that this album is a little bit overrated. However, overrated does not mean it's bad by any means. I would probably put it at a high A tier. I would say that this album is probably the most re-listenable out of any of his albums. There's just so many bangers on here that you can listen to in any context. My favorite song on Graduation, I would probably say, is Homecoming. I really like the feature on that song. But yeah, Graduation is still really good, and the trilogy of the Graduation albums is probably the best trilogy in hip-hop in my opinion, or it's very, very high up there. The next album I have is 808s and Heartbreak, and 808s and Heartbreak is tough because the first half of this album is some of my favorite Kanye music, but the second half of this album kind of drags down the experience for me. And also this album is super influential for hip-hop as a whole. The amount of artists like Drake and Kid Cudi that took a lot of inspiration from this album. The fact that this album is still kind of has influence today in the current landscape of rap cannot be understated. But in my opinion, I would probably put it in the A tier. Definitely not as good as Graduation, but the first half of the album is fantastic in my opinion. And it also has my favorite Kanye song of all time, which is Paranoid. That is my personal favorite Kanye song in his entire discography. I love Paranoid because it's kind of happy, but also kind of sad at the same time. It's just a very cinematic song for me, and I love it. Up next, we have Dark Fantasy, and Dark Fantasy, Kanye actually describes this album very well. He calls it pretty much a bouquet of all of his best qualities and puts it together for fans to really enjoy. And he says that that was the intent of the album, was to just take everything that people liked about Kanye and made a perfect album in my opinion. It's hard to compare Dark Fantasy to the rest of the albums in this tier because it's so much different and so much time passed since his first two albums. But it is definitely, in my opinion, in the top two, right next to the College Dropout, probably right under the College Dropout in my opinion. I will never forgive Fantano for giving this album a 6 out of 10. I will never understand why he said that. My favorite song on this album is A Devil in a New Dress. Up next we have Watch the Throne, and Watch the Throne is not a bad album, but for Kanye West and Jay-Z, this album could have been way better because both of these guys have been able to make classics, several classics each. But when they make an album together, it could have been so much more. That's not to say that this album is still really good. It has a lot of memorable tracks on there, like that one song about people in Paris, not to mention Otis, No Church in the Wild, and Ham. Those are probably my top 4. And my favorite song on this album, in my opinion, is Otis. The next album I have is Cruel Summer, and Cruel Summer is the one Kanye album I haven't listened to in its entirety. I know that this album has a lot of songs from other artists, and they basically remix it, like Chief Keef's Don't Like, as well as Mercy. A couple songs I can't remember, to be honest. I haven't listened to Cruel Summer because I haven't really been bothered to, because people say it's not really like that good compared to the rest of his discography, but I can't really say anything about this one. Up next we have Yeezus, which is easily the most controversial Kanye West album of all time. As far as people that love it or hate it, this one was pretty much divided the fan base. I would imagine. I wasn't very old when this album came out, but listening to it, it was an interesting experience, to say the least. Frankly, I should be listening to Yeezus more often because I wasn't a huge fan of it my first listen, but the more I listened to the rest of the album, I did enjoy it a little bit more. As of right now, I would probably put it at like a low A tier as far as enjoyment goes, but that's not to say that this album is super memorable and people still talk about it to this day. My favorite song on Yeezus is the opening track, On Sight. I know it's kind of a meme, but that song makes me laugh, but it also gets me in a hype mood. Up next, we have The Life of Pablo, and in my opinion, since Yeezus, this is his best album he's dropped in like the 2010s, past Dark Fantasy, actually. I would probably put this at a low... No, I'd probably put it at a high A tier. Would I put that above Graduation is the question. That's so hard to say because Graduation and The Life of Pablo are completely different. One thing that The Life of Pablo has that Graduation also has is it's very re-listenable, that you can listen to a lot of songs on this album many times, and there's just a lot of good playlist songs on both of these albums. Not to mention, I would say this is probably the most entertaining Kanye album for me, in my opinion. I just think it's just so much fun. The lyrics are super funny a lot of the times, but it's still good, and a lot of different vibes on this album, a lot of great features. Definitely one of his best albums, and the rollout was super memorable as well. My favorite song on The Life of Pablo is probably No More Parties in LA. I know that's kind of a safe pick, but that song is easily my favorite. Up next we have Ye, which is the first album I heard from him in its entirety. And when I first heard it, I would put it really high up there, but the more I listen to the rest of his discography, I would probably put it a little bit lower. But it's still a great album. I would say that the main problem with it is that it's just not long enough for me to put it anywhere higher. But it does have a lot of memorable songs on there. Some of them are funny, some of them are really good. But it is definitely a solid album, and it's a good listen because it's very quick and it's very entertaining. Up next we have Kids See Ghosts, and I know people are going to throw snowballs at me for this, but I actually haven't heard Kids See Ghosts in so long that I can't even really give a valid opinion on it, to be honest. I would put it around A tier, but I can't remember anything because I haven't heard this album in years. I don't know why I haven't revisited this, but I would probably I'm going to put it in here for now. Please don't throw snowballs at me. Up next, we have Jesus Is King. And Jesus Is King, in my opinion, is the worst album in his discography. With that being said, that doesn't make it an objectively bad album. To be honest, I haven't really listened to this album since it came out. I listened to it a lot when it came out, but it was not very memorable. Compared to the rest of his discography. And lastly, we have Donda. Donda is what Jesus Is King should have been. This album was way more cinematic than Jesus Is King. Vocally, it's one of Kanye's best albums as far as his raw singing. Probably up there with 808s and Heartbreak, like as far as just the singing on the album. A lot of really good features on here that was really fun because they were all hidden, so you kind of just had to see what was going to happen next. Not to mention the rollout was very nostalgic. I would probably put it in the B tier over Ye and below Yeezus. Definitely not a bad album by any means. It is a little bit long and it has a couple songs that kind of have two versions. And it had a lot of changes, so it was kind of confusing. And then the order of the album switched around, but it was still a very enjoyable album, and it's better than CLB. With that being said, my favorite song on the album is 24. I love that song so much because of the choir. And also the Drake version is really good as well. And yeah, that is my Kanye album. Just so you guys know, this is on the Kanye scale and not the album scale. So just because an album is a C tier does not mean it's like an objective C tier. It's a Kanye C tier, which means it's still pretty good. So everything, I would say he has no really bad album on his discography. Everything is all really good. And my top 3 is The College Dropout, Dark Fantasy, and Late Registration. Let me know what you guys think about my tier list. Of course, it's objective. And if you guys disagree, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know what your guys' favorite Kanye album is in the comments below. And I will see you guys next time. Peace.